This is Brass Check, and we want to pay special attention to a very important article. It affects thousands and thousands and thousands of children here and all over the world, and it's a very underreported story. We've actually touched on it a little bit. I thought we were the only people paying attention to it, but thankfully we're not. This is an article from youthtoday.org, a nonprofit group that looks out for the safety and well-being of children and families and communities. And the author is Richard Wexler. And Richard Wexler is a person who runs a group called the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform. And boy, if ever a group needed reform, it is the child protection system. It's possibly in the top 10 of the most corrupt institutions in the United States of America, which is saying a lot. But here's the headline: why it's so easy to troll someone with anonymous child abuse reports. Okay, troll. What does it mean to troll? Well, it can mean a million different things. It can mean just annoying somebody. It can also mean attacking somebody with lethal intent online. What would be an example of lethal intent? Accusing somebody of a ghastly crime that they never committed and then giving people your home address and then spreading that message as far and wide as possible. That's pretty close to lethal intent. And this goes on all the time. And guess who gets targeted? People who are telling the truth about things. So trolling, here's another example of the seriousness of trolling, and this is something we have reported. It is a very sick practice. It is amazingly endorsed by NBC. They actually wrote an article and published an article praising people who do this. And here's how it works. You don't like somebody, so you whip up some fake claim with Child Protective Services, and you send it anonymously, of course, to Child Protective Services. You can claim that they're abusing their children, and you can make it as ghastly as you can, your sick imagination can manufacture. And Child Protective Services is required, and it's probably a good thing, to go and look into the claim. Now, where the system breaks down, it breaks down in two ways. One, these sick people can issue the same claim over and over again, and Child Protective Services, instead of saying, hey, we've been to the house, we realize this is harassment, we're not going to bother these people anymore, Child Protective Services just keeps coming. Even worse, they put a permanent record in that person's file, in that family's file. So if anything does happen, let's say a kid breaks his leg or something, or breaks, these things happen. Now all of a sudden there was something in the file and this injury becomes suspicious. Pretty bad, but it gets worse. There have been cases, many cases, where these families have to hire attorneys to protect their families, because somebody in Child Protective Services doesn't have the intelligence to discriminate between a false claim and a real one. And the problem is, and unfortunately this article doesn't get into it, I mean it's a good article, is that there's money to be made taking children from their families. It's an industry. It's a business. It's a bureaucratic business. The more children they take, the bigger the bureaucracy. The more people on the payroll, the more prestige for the person running the agency. And then there's all kinds of side deals that go on too, illegal ones, and we've covered that. It's a sick industry, and we published a report on it recently from a woman that actually runs the Baltimore Child Protective Services. And she admits that it's filled with problems. She's doing her best to reform it, but that it's a basically unreformable system based on unreformable assumptions. But anyway, yes, there are sick people out there, and you know what? Let me look it up and name them. And I'll name them because they're proud of what they do, and NBC is endorsing what they do. So first of all, let's put a name to the reporter. The reporter is named Brandy Zadrozny, and the women that she endorses who are doing this, one is named Melissa Eaton, and the article says that she's in Salisbury, North Carolina. You know, I'm not doxing her, or whatever that word is. NBC is. The other one is someone named Amanda Seigler, Seigler, and she's in Lake Worth, Florida. And I'll just read straight from the NBC article. This is no conspiracy theory. This is what these sick people are doing. They spend much of their free time in the last 3 years infiltrating more than a dozen private Facebook groups for parents with autistic kids. And what they do is they've decided, because they don't have medical degrees, they don't have even degrees in science, they've decided in their abysmal ignorance that autism should not be treated, and anybody that attempts to help an autistic child is committing some kind of a crime. So they cherry pick statements from these private groups, which they've gotten by being liars. And by the way, violating Facebook's terms of agreement. You're not allowed to hide your identity on Facebook. Has Facebook taken these people down? Absolutely not. They're still up doing what they do. So, for instance, if a mother says, my child screams all night, well, that unfortunately is a symptom of autism, of severe autism. They will cut and paste that, turn it around, and make it look as if the child is being abused. And then they will figure out, okay, who is this person? They'll do a little detective work. They crowdsource it among their sick followers. And then they contact Child Protective Services, wherever it may be in the country, and issue an anonymous report. And then Child Protective Services has to go and check it out. The families are disturbed, harassed, and if they fall into the hands of a bad one, they may have to take legal action to save their own children. Okay? So this is a story written by Richard Wexler. Thank God for him and for the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform. And there's a link below. And I'll read it. The first paragraph. When she first learned that journalist and Black Lives Matter activist Shaun King and his family were being harassed by a troll who had called in a false report of child abuse, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was outraged. She is the activist and champion of the poor and working class who was catapulted to national prominence when she won an upset victory in a Democratic congressional primary in New York City. But even with all her experience as a progressive organizer and activist, she was shocked by how Child Protective Service agencies work. This is wrong, Ocasio-Cortez tweeted. Shaun is an activist that has been targeted in the past. Anonymous claims should be thoroughly vetted before exposing his children and family to potentially damaging experience, And then she added this question, what's going on here? What's going on here? Business as usual. That's what's going on here. The only part that's unusual is that this is one of those rare occasions when Child Protective Services targeted a family with resources to fight back, not to mention more than 1 million followers on Twitter. In other words, they did target this guy, they did target his family. Unfortunately for the evildoers, and that's the only way to describe these people, they are doing evil. Unfortunately for them, this guy had a backing, including a United States congressperson. So their little game didn't work. But what happens when a poor family, maybe that doesn't have a lot of education, that doesn't have a lot of confidence in their ability to defend themselves, that may be having real problems? What happens when CPS shows up at their door? The children get taken. And NBC, and let's make sure everybody knows this person's name because she's proud of her work. She stands by it. Brandy Zadrozny thinks it's a great idea, thinks this is the way to do things in America. If you're ignorant and don't know anything about science and have a whacked out opinion that nobody should pursue alternative treatments for autism or other diseases, you have the right to make up false claims about families and submit them to Child Protective Services. This is the position of NBC and Brandy Zadrozny. And she followed up this article with another article giving the name of one of the mothers who posted a question to a private health-related Facebook group. That woman has now been harassed and hassled and has received death threats and has had to shut down her home business as a result of this. So I thank this decent man, Richard Wexler, of the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform, for writing this informative article about trolls in general who abuse the Child Protective Services system. And I'm pointing you to this article on NBC News so that you can see what's going on. That's the report. I mean, this is unbelievable, and they're getting away with it, at least for now. By the way, I just got to tell you, look up this woman's name, Brandy Zadrozny, Zadrozny. You know what her last report was, her last big expose? There was a group of people trying to identify and track down pedophiles in their communities. And Miss Zadrozny found that terrible. She thought it was unfair to target these poor pedophile people. Look it up. You cannot make this up. So she went from defending the rights of pedophiles to supporting a ring of unhinged, psychotic trolls who are attacking the families who have autistic children with fake reports to Child Protective Services. That's NBC. That's the mainstream news media doing what it does best. But wow, they really went for it this time. How much more in your face does it have to be than this? That's Brass Check.